My name is America. Yes, that's really my name. Captain America Rodriguez, to be exact, though most people back home in San Antonio, Texas, just called me Mary. My parents, both proud immigrants from Mexico who became U.S. citizens before I was born, gave me that name as a promise, as a symbol of hope and belonging. They never imagined how literally I would embody it when I joined the Army at 18, fresh out of high school with nothing but a dream and a burning desire to serve something bigger than myself. I grew up in the West Side, where the smell of barbacoa on Sunday mornings mixed with the sound of Tejano music spilling out from every other house. My father worked construction, his hands perpetually calloused and sun-darkened. My mother cleaned houses in Alamo Heights, the wealthy part of town where the houses had more bathrooms than our entire apartment. They worked themselves to the bone, so my 3 younger brothers and I could have opportunities they never had. When I told them I was joining the military instead of going to college, my father cried. Not because he was disappointed, but because he was proud. "Mija," he said, gripping my shoulders with those strong, weathered hands. "You're going to be someone. You're going to make a difference." 12 years later, I had made it to captain. Leading a mixed-gender combat unit wasn't just a job, it was my entire identity. I'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, and countless training missions across 3 continents. My platoon respected me, not because of my rank, but because I'd earned it in the sand, in the heat, in the moments when bullets flew and decisions had to be made in split seconds. I'd carried wounded soldiers on my back. I'd held dying hands and whispered promises I couldn't keep. I'd stood in formation under the blazing Texas sun at Fort Cavazos and felt the weight of every star, every stripe, every medal on my chest as a reminder of what I'd sacrificed and what I'd gained. That's where I met Derek. Derek Matthews was a civilian contractor who worked with the logistics division on base. He was handsome in that all-American way, blonde hair, blue eyes, perfect smile. He seemed fascinated by my world, always asking questions about missions, about leadership, about what it felt like to command respect in a male-dominated field. In the beginning, I thought he genuinely admired my career. He'd show up at the officers' club in Killeen, waiting for me to finish briefings. He'd drive the hour and a half to San Antonio on weekends to meet my family, charming my mother with his Spanish attempts and playing football with my brothers in the dusty park near our old neighborhood. "You're incredible," he'd whisper, running his fingers along the scar on my shoulder from a shrapnel wound in Kandahar. "So strong, so beautiful. I've never met anyone like you." For 2 years, Derek was my sanctuary. When I came back from the hell of deployment, he was there with quiet nights, home-cooked meals, and the promise of normalcy. He proposed on a cool October evening at the Riverwalk, down on one knee in front of tourists and street musicians, the San Antonio River reflecting the string lights like liquid gold. I said yes because I loved him. I said yes because after spending years in boots and tactical gear, the idea of building something soft and permanent felt like coming home. But engagement changed things. Slowly, subtly, like water eroding stone. Derek started making comments about my schedule. "You're always gone," he'd complain when I had to leave for training exercises. "Other guys' fiancés are planning centerpieces. Mine is doing reconnaissance drills in the desert." He'd laugh when he said it, but there was an edge, a bitterness that cut deeper each time. Then came the uniform conversation. We were sitting in his apartment in Harker Heights, pizza boxes open on the coffee table, wedding magazines spread across the floor. I'd just returned from a 3-week training mission in Louisiana, exhausted and sunburned, still shaking off the weight of command decisions and sleep deprivation. "So, I was thinking," Derek said casually, not looking up from his phone. "You'll obviously wear a traditional wedding dress, right? Something elegant. Maybe lace? My mom has some ideas." I paused mid-bite, a slice of pepperoni pizza halfway to my mouth. "I was actually thinking about wearing my dress blues," I said carefully. "My Army service uniform. The formal one." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Derek finally looked up, his expression somewhere between disbelief and disgust. "You're joking." "I'm not joking. Derek, the military is my life. It's who I am. Wearing my uniform on the most important day of my life feels right. Authentic." He laughed. Actually laughed. Not the warm, affectionate sound I'd fallen in love with, but something harsh and mocking. America, come on, you're a woman. You're my bride. People expect to see you in a dress, not a costume? What are you trying to prove? It's not a costume, I said quietly, setting down the pizza. Something cold settled in my stomach. It's my service, my rank, my identity. Your identity is about to be my wife, he snapped, his voice rising. Can't you just be normal for one day? Just one day where you're not Captain Rodriguez, where you're not trying to be one of the guys, where you're just a woman? The words hit like a physical blow. I stared at him, really looked at him for the first time in months, and saw something I'd been too busy, too tired, too hopeful to see before. Resentment? Deep, festering resentment. Derek, I said slowly, my voice the same calm I used in combat briefings. If you can't accept who I am, I accept you, he interrupted, his face flushing. I just want you to be realistic. My family, my friends, they're traditional people. They're already weirded out that you're older than me, that you outrank half the men on base, that you've killed people. I've served my country, I corrected, my jaw tight. Same difference, he muttered. Look, just wear the dress. Make everyone happy. Make me happy. Is that really too much to ask? I should have walked away then. I should have seen the red flags waving like signal flares in the night. But I was tired. Tired of fighting battles on every front. Tired of proving myself. Part of me wanted to believe that love could bridge the gap between who I was and who Derek wanted me to be. I'll think about it. I lied. But I didn't think about it. I knew, deep in my bones, that wearing anything other than my uniform would be a betrayal of every soldier I'd ever served with, every sacrifice I'd made, every morning I'd woken up before dawn to run until my lungs burned and my legs shook. My uniform wasn't just fabric and metals. It was my skin, my story, my truth. The wedding planning became a battlefield of its own. Derek's mother, Patricia Matthews, was a force of nature, a former Dallas socialite who'd moved to the Austin suburbs and never quite let go of her country club sensibilities. She had opinions about everything. The flowers, white roses, obviously. The venue, a historic church in Georgetown, not the base chapel I'd suggested. The guest list, limited military presence. We don't want it to look too militant, she'd said with a tight smile. Every Sunday, I'd drive up to their house in Cedar Park for planning sessions that felt more like interrogations. Patricia would sit at her perfectly set dining table, color-coded binders spread before her, a glass of sweet tea perpetually in hand. Now, America, she'd say in that syrupy southern accent that somehow made everything sound like an insult. I've found the most darling dress shops in Austin. There's one on South Congress that specializes in vintage lace. Very feminine. Very appropriate. I appreciate that, Patricia, but I've made my decision. I'll be wearing my Army service uniform. The temperature in the room would drop 10 degrees. Derek would shift uncomfortably. His father, a retired insurance salesman named Bob, would suddenly find his phone fascinating. Sweetie, Patricia would continue, her smile never wavering. I don't think you understand. This is Derek's day too. His friends, our family, they have certain expectations. You want to look beautiful, don't you? Like a bride? I will look like a bride, I'd respond, keeping my voice level even as anger simmered beneath my ribs. A bride who's also a captain in the United States Army. These conversations happened weekly, monthly, until they became a war of attrition. Derek would pull me aside after dinner, his voice low and pleading. Just compromise, Mary. Just this once. For me. For us. But how do you compromise on your identity? How do you meet halfway between who you are and who someone wants you to be? My own family was a different story entirely. When I told my mother about the uniform decision over tamales and café con leche at her kitchen table in San Antonio, she grabbed my face with both hands and kissed my forehead. Mija, you wear that uniform with pride, she said fiercely, her eyes bright with tears. You earned every thread. Don't let anyone make you ashamed of what you've done. My father nodded from his seat, his weathered face serious. Your abuela would have been so proud. She came to this country with nothing. You serve it with everything. That uniform is sacred. My brothers were less sentimental but equally supportive. If that gringo has a problem with your uniform, my youngest brother Miguel said, cracking his knuckles dramatically, we can have a conversation with him in the parking lot. There will be no parking lot conversations, I said, laughing despite the tightness in my chest. I can handle Derek, but could I? As the wedding date approached, a humid Saturday in late June, the tension between us grew unbearable. We barely spoke, except to coordinate logistics. He moved through his apartment like a ghost, and when I stayed over, we slept on opposite sides of the bed, miles apart, despite the few inches between us. 3 weeks before the wedding, I was called into my commanding officer's office at Fort Cavazos. Colonel James Harrison was a career soldier, 50-something, with gray hair, buzzed military short, and eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine. He'd served with my father briefly decades ago, and he'd mentored me through my captain's promotion. "Rodriguez," he said, gesturing for me to sit, "I'm hearing rumors." "Sir?" "About your wedding, about your uniform choice." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "And about your fiancé's reaction to it." I felt heat rise to my face. "With all due respect, sir, my personal life is your personal life until it affects your performance," he interrupted, not unkindly. "You've been distracted. Your last training brief was sloppy. That's not like you." He was right. I'd been so consumed with wedding drama that I'd let it bleed into my work. Unforgivable. "I apologize, sir. It won't happen again." "America," he said, using my first name, which he rarely did. "I'm going to tell you something my wife told me 30 years ago when I was choosing between my career and her comfort. She said, 'If you have to choose between who you are and who I want you to be, then I'm not the right person for you. Your fiancé should love you in that uniform. He should be proud. If he's not—'" He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. "Noted, sir. One more thing." He pulled a folder from his desk. "This is classified, so it stays in this room. We have a mission brewing. High-level security detail for a diplomatic envoy in Eastern Europe. 3-month deployment starting in July. I'm putting together a team, and I want you to lead it. It's a career-making assignment, Rodriguez. The kind of thing that leads to major." My heart leaped. This was what I'd worked for, what I'd sacrificed for. "But it starts the week after your wedding," he continued. "You'd have to leave for pre-mission training almost immediately. Can you handle that? Could I?" I thought about Derek, about his complaints regarding my schedule, about his resentment every time duty called me away. Then I thought about the weight of command, the trust of soldiers under my leadership, the promise I'd made to myself and my country. "Yes, sir," I said without hesitation. "I can handle it." He nodded, satisfied. "Good. Enjoy your wedding, Captain. You've earned it." But as I left his office and stepped into the brutal Texas heat, the sprawling base stretching out before me, barracks and training grounds and the distant sound of drill sergeants barking orders, I wondered if Derek and I were ever going to make it down the aisle at all. The morning of the wedding, I woke up in my parents' house on the west side, in my childhood bedroom that still had faded posters of Selena and military recruitment ads I'd torn from magazines as a teenager. The San Antonio heat was already oppressive at 7 a.m., the air thick and sticky even with the window AC unit rattling on full blast. I could hear my mother moving around in the kitchen, the smell of coffee and pan dulce drifting down the hallway. I sat up, my Army service uniform hanging on the back of the door, freshly pressed and perfect. The dark blue coat, the light blue trousers with their gold stripe, the medals arranged in precise rows over my left breast, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Army Commendation Medal, Afghanistan Campaign Medal, and more. Each one represented blood, sweat, fear, triumph. Each one was a piece of my soul made visible. My hands trembled slightly as I stood and approached the uniform, not from nervousness about the wedding, but from the weight of what it represented. This was my truth, my identity, my non-negotiable line in the sand. My mother knocked and entered without waiting for an answer, carrying a cup of coffee and her rosary beads. "Mija," she said softly, her eyes moving from my face to the uniform and back again. "You're sure? There's still time to change your mind if—" "I'm sure, Mama." She nodded, setting down the coffee and taking my hands. "Then you wear it with your head high. You are mi capitana valiente, my brave captain." And if that boy doesn't see how beautiful you are in this uniform, then he doesn't deserve you." We stood there for a long moment, two women across generations, connected by sacrifice and strength. My grandmother had crossed the border with nothing. My mother had cleaned toilets in rich people's houses, and I had earned the right to command soldiers in combat. Our stories were different, but the thread of resilience ran through all of them. By noon, I was standing in the church entrance in Georgetown, a beautiful old stone building with stained glass windows that cast colored light across the wooden pews. The church was packed. Derek's family and friends filled most of the seats, their expressions ranging from curious to uncomfortable. My family and fellow soldiers occupied the back rows, a stark contrast in their mix of civilian clothes and dress uniforms. I'd requested that my unit be there in uniform, but Derek had pushed back hard. "It'll look like a military parade, not a wedding," he'd argued. So we'd compromised. They could come, but in civilian attire. Looking back, I should have known that compromise was a mistake. You don't ask soldiers to hide who they are, just like you don't ask me to. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, my second in command, stood beside me in a simple navy dress, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the military posture she couldn't quite shake, even in heels. "Captain," she said quietly, her eyes scanning my uniform with approval. "You look exactly as you should, strong, honorable. If he doesn't get it, he'll get it," I said, though my stomach churned with doubt. The music started. Traditional wedding march, organs swelling through the church. My father appeared at my side, handsome in his only suit, tears already glistening in his eyes. "Ready, mija?" "Ready, papa." We walked down that aisle, and I felt every eye in the church turn toward me. I heard the gasps, the whispers. Saw Patricia Matthews's face go pale, her hand flying to her mouth. Saw Derek's friends exchange glances, some smirking, others confused. But I also saw my soldiers straighten in their seats, saw pride flash across their faces, saw Lieutenant Chen give me the smallest nod of respect. Derek stood at the altar in his tuxedo, and for a moment, I thought maybe it would be okay. Maybe seeing me here, in this moment, he'd understand. He'd remember why he fell in love with me. But as I got closer, I saw his expression. Not love, not pride, disgust, pure, undisguised disgust. I reached the altar. My father kissed my cheek and took his seat. The pastor began the ceremony, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Derek wasn't looking at me. He was staring at my uniform, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. His hands, which should have been reaching for mine, were balled into fists at his sides. The pastor continued through the opening remarks, through the readings, through the entire first section of the ceremony. Derek remained rigid, silent, his eyes fixed on my medals with something like hatred. Finally, we reached the vows, the moment where we were supposed to declare our love, our commitment, our future. The pastor turned to Derek. "Derek Matthews, do you take America Rodriguez to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The church held its breath. Derek looked at me then, really looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes made my blood run cold. "Before I answer that," he said, his voice carrying through the stunned silence, "I need to say something." My heart stopped. "Derek, no, everyone needs to hear this," he continued, his voice growing louder, more confident, feeding off the shocked attention of 200 guests. "I've tried to be supportive. I've tried to understand. But standing here, looking at my bride, dressed like she's about to deploy to a war zone instead of marry me, I have to ask, what kind of woman chooses a costume over a wedding dress?" The word costume hit like a slap. I felt my face flush, felt the familiar burn of anger and humiliation mixing in my chest. "This isn't a costume," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake inside me. "This is my uniform, my service." "Your fantasy," Derek shot back, and now he was addressing the crowd, his voice dripping with contempt. "She's so obsessed with being one of the guys, with proving she's tough, that she can't even be a woman for one day. One day. I asked for one day where she could be feminine, where she could be beautiful, where she could be normal, and she shows up looking like—" He gestured at me dismissively. Like a soldier playing dress-up, the church erupted in whispers. Patricia Matthews was fanning herself, looking faint. Derek's groomsmen shifted uncomfortably. My family sat frozen in horror. But what happened next changed everything. The main doors of the church exploded open with a bang that echoed like thunder through the sacred space. Every head turned. The whispers died instantly, replaced by a silence so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. And then they came. Soldiers. My soldiers. 100 men and women from my unit at Fort Cavazos, marching in perfect formation down the center aisle in full dress uniform. The sound of their synchronized boots on the stone floor was like a drumbeat, powerful and unrelenting. Lieutenant Sarah Chen led them, her face set in fierce determination, her dress uniform immaculate. Behind her came Sergeant First Class Marcus Williams, a mountain of a man who'd served 3 tours with me. Behind him, Specialist Jennifer Park, who I'd pulled from a burning Humvee in Kandahar. Behind her, dozens more, every face familiar, every soldier someone I'd trained with, bled with, trusted with my life. They weren't supposed to be here. Not like this. Not in uniform. But they'd come anyway. Colonel Harrison was near the front, his chest covered in ribbons and medals that represented 30 years of service. He caught my eye and gave the smallest nod, and I understood immediately. He'd made this happen. He'd gathered them. He'd given them permission to stand with me when I needed them most. The formation reached the front of the church and executed a perfect halt. The sound of 100 boots clicking together in unison made several guests jump. Derek stumbled backward, his face draining of color. The pastor looked like he might faint. Lieutenant Chen stepped forward, her voice ringing clear and strong through the church. "Captain America Rodriguez," she called out, her tone formal and filled with respect. "Your unit requests permission to address the situation, ma'am." I couldn't speak. My throat was closed, tears burning behind my eyes. I managed a nod. Chen turned to face Derek, and her expression could have melted steel. "You called the captain's uniform a costume," she said, her voice cold. "You called her service a fantasy. You questioned her femininity, her beauty, her normalcy." She paused, letting each word sink in. "Let me tell you what that costume represents, sir." She gestured to the soldier beside her, a young man with a prosthetic leg visible below his dress uniform. Private First Class Tommy Henderson. Captain Rodriguez carried him 2 miles through enemy fire after an IED took his leg. She refused to leave him. She saved his life. Another soldier stepped forward. Corporal Lisa Martinez. The captain talked me down from suicide after my 3rd deployment. She spent 6 hours with me in the hospital, missed her own promotion ceremony to make sure I was okay. She gave me a reason to keep living. Then Sergeant Williams spoke, his deep voice resonating. The captain led our convoy through an ambush in Helmand Province. 3 vehicles, 27 soldiers. She made decisions in seconds that saved every single life. I've served with a lot of officers, and I'd follow her into hell without hesitation. One by one, soldiers stepped forward. Each one shared a story. Each one revealed a moment where my leadership, my courage, my humanity had made a difference. The church listened in stunned silence. Some of Derek's family members were crying. Even Patricia Matthews had stopped fanning herself, her face transformed by something like shame. Derek stood frozen, his earlier confidence evaporating with each testimony. He looked small suddenly, diminished, like a child who'd wandered into a room of adults and realized how foolish he sounded. Finally, Colonel Harrison spoke. His voice carried the weight of command, of a lifetime spent in service. "Captain Rodriguez is one of the finest officers I've had the privilege to serve with," he said. "Her uniform is not a costume. It's a symbol of sacrifice, of duty, of honor. She's earned every thread, every medal, every stripe. And any man who can't see that, who can't respect that, who would humiliate her on what should be the happiest day of her life." He paused, his gaze moving to Derek with undisguised contempt. "That man doesn't deserve her." Then came the moment that would be seared into my memory forever. Lieutenant Chen barked a command. "Unit, attentayon!" 100 soldiers snapped to attention, their movements precise and synchronized. "Present arms!" As one, every soldier raised their right hand in salute. The gesture was crisp, perfect, a wall of respect and loyalty directed at me, at Captain America Rodriguez, at their commanding officer, at their friend. I stood there in my uniform, tears streaming down my face, looking at this incredible display of solidarity. These were soldiers who'd seen me at my worst and my best, who'd witnessed my strength and my vulnerability, who knew exactly who I was beneath the rank and the medals, a woman who bled and cried and fought and loved with everything she had. The salute held for a long moment, and in that silence, everything became crystal clear. This was my family. These soldiers, this unit, this life of service, this was where I belonged. Not with a man who wanted me to be smaller, quieter, more convenient. Not with someone who saw my greatest source of pride as an embarrassment. I returned the salute, my hand steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "Order arms!" Chen commanded, and the soldiers dropped their salutes in unison. I turned to Derek then, really looked at him. His face was red, whether from shame or anger I couldn't tell, and didn't care. Patricia Matthews was whispering furiously to her husband. The pastor looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 5 minutes. "Derek," I said quietly, and my voice echoed in the stillness. "Thank you for showing me exactly who you are before I made the biggest mistake of my life." I pulled the engagement ring from my finger, a modest diamond that had never felt quite right, and placed it in his hand. His fingers closed around it automatically, but he didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. I turned to my unit. "Dismissed," I said, though my voice cracked on the word. But they didn't leave. Instead, Lieutenant Chen smiled. "With respect, ma'am, we'd like to escort you out, if that's acceptable." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The formation parted, creating a path down the center aisle. I walked through it, flanked by soldiers, my family joining us as we passed their pews. My mother was crying openly, my father's arm around her shoulders. My brothers fell in step behind me, their faces fierce with protective pride. We walked out of that church together, leaving Derek standing alone at the altar, the wedding guests murmuring in shock and confusion. The Texas sun hit me like a wall of heat as we emerged, but I'd never felt freer in my life. The parking lot of that Georgetown church became an impromptu gathering. Soldiers milled around, some laughing with relief, others checking on me with concerned expressions. My family formed a protective circle, my mother fussing over my uniform, even though it was still perfect, my brothers making jokes to ease the tension. Lieutenant Chen approached with a bottle of water and a knowing look. "Captain," she said, handing me the bottle, "that was the most badass thing I've ever seen. And I once watched you disarm an insurgent with a folding chair." I laughed, the sound surprising me. "How did you all even know to come?" "I specifically said civilian clothes. Colonel Harrison called an emergency formation yesterday," she explained. "Told us what was happening. Said one of our own was being disrespected and we had a choice. Follow the original orders or stand up for our captain. Turns out, every single person in the unit wanted to be here. We had to draw straws because we couldn't fit everyone in the church." She grinned. "Technically, we're all going to get reamed for wearing dress uniforms without proper authorization, but it was worth it." Sergeant Williams joined us, his massive frame casting a shadow over the conversation. "Ma'am, speaking for all of us, we're sorry you had to go through that, but we're not sorry we came. You've had our backs for years. About time we had yours." The emotion welling up in my chest threatened to break through my carefully maintained composure. These people, these soldiers, had risked disciplinary action, had driven hours from Fort Cavazos, had coordinated this elaborate show of support, all for me. Because in the military, you don't abandon your own. You don't let them face their battles alone. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, my voice thick. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough." "Then don't say anything," Williams replied with a smile. "Just promise you'll keep being the kind of leader worth showing up for." Colonel Harrison approached, and the crowd instinctively parted. He looked at me with an expression that was part stern commanding officer, part proud mentor. "Rodriguez," he said formally, then softened slightly. "America. You handled that with more grace than most people could have managed. I'm proud to have you in my command." "Thank you, sir. And thank you for—" I gestured at the assembled soldiers. "For making this happen." "I didn't make anything happen," he said, though his eyes twinkled. "I simply mentioned to a few key personnel that their captain could use some moral support. They took it from there." Soldiers tend to do that when they respect their commanding officer. He paused, his expression growing serious. Now, about that mission we discussed. You still interested? I thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. The mission. Eastern Europe. 3 months of purpose, of duty, of being exactly who I was meant to be without apology. Absolutely, sir. Good. Briefing is Monday morning at 0600. We deploy the following Wednesday. That gives you a week to get your affairs in order. He glanced back at the church, where guests were beginning to trickle out, most looking embarrassed or uncomfortable. Something tells me you won't need much time to pack. He was right. Derek and I had been living separately anyway, me in my small apartment near the base, him in Harker Heights. My life was already self-contained, already prepared for the next mission. In a way, I'd been preparing to leave all along, some part of me knowing that this relationship was built on sand. My father appeared at my elbow, his face still showing traces of tears. Mija, we're going to head back to San Antonio. Your mother wants to make your favorite meal, carne guisada and rice. You'll come, yes? Stay the night? Forget all this? I'll come, Papa. But first I need to do something. I excused myself from the crowd and walked back toward the church entrance. Most of the guests had left through side doors, avoiding the spectacle in the parking lot. But I saw Patricia Matthews standing near the steps, her expression complicated, part defensive, part ashamed. She saw me approaching and stiffened. For a moment, I thought she might say something cutting, something about how I'd ruined her son's wedding, embarrassed their family. But instead, she surprised me. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't understand what your uniform meant, what you've sacrificed. Derek told me stories, but I didn't really listen. I just wanted everything to be perfect, traditional, and I forgot that sometimes tradition needs to evolve. She paused, wiping at her eyes. You deserve better than what my son gave you today. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me was still angry, still hurt by months of subtle and not so subtle pressure to be someone I wasn't. But Patricia was a mother protecting her child, however misguided that protection had been. I hope Derek finds someone who can be what he needs, I said finally. But I'm not that person. I never was. She nodded, seeming to understand. For what it's worth, I think you're remarkable. My son is a fool. I left her there and returned to my soldiers, my family, my people. We formed a convoy back to San Antonio, military vehicles mixed with my family's cars, an unlikely parade heading south on I-35. The sun was setting by the time we reached the west side, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of deployment sunsets, of watching the day end from rooftops in Kabul and patrol routes in Baghdad. My mother's kitchen was too small for everyone, so we spilled out into the backyard, soldiers and family members mixing together, sharing stories and laughter under strings of lights my father had hung years ago. Someone brought beer. Someone else brought a guitar. Corporal Martinez, who I'd learned was from San Antonio's south side, knew all the same Tejano songs my mother loved, and soon there was music and singing and the kind of joy that comes after surviving something difficult. Lieutenant Chen found me sitting on the back steps, watching the celebration, my dress uniform jacket draped over the railing. She sat beside me, beer in hand, her own jacket similarly discarded in the Texas heat. You okay, Captain? Yeah, I said, and meant it. I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I feel free. Derek was an idiot. Derek was Derek. I was the idiot for thinking I could make it work. I took a sip of my beer, the cold liquid cutting through the lingering emotional weight. You know what the worst part was? Not the humiliation, not the public rejection. It was the realization that he never actually saw me. He saw some version of me he wanted to create, softer, smaller, more convenient. He never saw the actual woman standing in front of him. His loss, Chen said simply. There are plenty of people who see you exactly as you are and think you're incredible. Like the 100 soldiers who showed up in full dress uniform to crash a wedding? She grinned. Exactly like that. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching my youngest brother try to teach Sergeant Williams some kind of complicated dance move that involved a lot of hip shaking and laughter. My mother was deep in conversation with Colonel Harrison, probably showing him pictures of me as a child, which meant I'd be hearing about this for years. Tell me about the mission, I said finally. The real details. Chen's expression shifted, became more focused. Diplomatic security detail in Romania. High-value targets, potential terrorist threats. 3 months, possibly extending to 6 if the situation escalates. It's going to be intense, Captain. Long hours, high stress, zero margin for error. Sounds perfect, I said, and I meant it. This was what I needed. Not a honeymoon in Cancun, not a suburban house in Harker Heights, not a life spent trying to be someone I wasn't. I needed the clarity of mission objectives, the trust of soldiers under my command, the satisfaction of serving something greater than myself. You're going to make major after this, Chen said confidently. Harrison, as much as told me so. This mission is your ticket to the next level. Major. The rank I'd been chasing for years. Another step up the ladder, another level of responsibility and leadership. In a different timeline, I might have been planning that promotion ceremony with Derek at my side, awkwardly navigating his discomfort with military culture. Now I could celebrate it surrounded by people who understood exactly what it meant, what it cost, what it represented. The party continued late into the night. Eventually, soldiers began departing. Early mornings and long drives back to Fort Cavazos calling them home. Each one stopped to say goodbye, to offer some final word of support or encouragement. By midnight, it was just my family remaining, cleaning up paper plates and beer bottles, my mother wrapping up leftover food in her usual efficient way. I stood in my childhood bedroom later, uniform carefully hung up, medals catching the lamplight. Tomorrow I'd start preparing for the mission. Paperwork, equipment checks, briefings, the 1,000 small details that went into deployment. But tonight, I let myself feel everything. The humiliation and anger, yes, but also the overwhelming gratitude for soldiers who'd stood up for me, for a family who'd never asked me to be anything other than who I was, for a commanding officer who'd created the opportunity for this incredible show of support. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Derek, I'm sorry, I panicked. I love you. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling nothing but a distant sort of pity. This was who Derek was, reactive, insecure, unable to support a woman who outshined him. An apology now, after everything, meant nothing. It was too late, too little, and too fundamentally misaligned with who I needed my partner to be. I deleted the message without responding and blocked the number. There was nothing left to say to Derek Matthews. Our story was over, ended in a church in Georgetown with 100 soldiers saluting the woman he'd tried to diminish. I opened my laptop and began reviewing mission files Colonel Harrison had sent over, letting the familiar rhythm of military planning ground me. Eastern Europe. Diplomatic security. 3 months of purpose and clarity. This was my future. Not wedding planning and arguments about uniforms and compromise. My mother knocked softly and entered with hot chocolate, sitting on the edge of my bed like she had when I was a child. You're sure you're okay, mija? I'm sure, Mama. Today was hard, but it was also necessary. I needed to see who Derek really was before I legally tied my life to his. Your uniform was beautiful, she said firmly. You were beautiful. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. I won't. I promise. She kissed my forehead and left me to my work, to my planning, to my future. I stayed up until 3 in the morning, reading briefings and intelligence reports, preparing mentally for the next chapter. The mission would be challenging. They always were. But I'd have my unit, my training, and the absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. A week later, I stood on the tarmac at Fort Cavazos, duffel bag at my feet, watching the transport plane being loaded with equipment and supplies. My unit was assembled nearby, some checking gear, others saying final goodbyes to family members who'd come to see them off. Lieutenant Chen appeared at my side, her expression a mix of excitement and determination. Ready, Captain? I looked around at the familiar sight of base life, the heat shimmering off the concrete, the distant sound of drill instructors, the flag snapping in the wind. I thought about everything that had brought me to this moment. The girl from San Antonio who'd joined the army with nothing but hope, the soldier who'd survived combat tours and personal betrayal, the woman who'd stood at an altar in full-dress uniform and watched her entire unit march in to defend her honor. Ready, I said, and we walked toward the plane together. As we lifted off, Texas shrinking beneath us, I pulled out the small photo I always carried on deployment. My parents, my brothers, and now, tucked in behind it, a picture someone had taken in the church parking lot. Me in full uniform, surrounded by 100 soldiers, all of us grinning like we'd just won a war. In a way, we had. 3 months turned into 6 months. The mission was everything Colonel Harrison had promised. Complex, demanding, career-defining. I made decisions that saved lives and completed objectives that earned commendations. When I finally returned to Texas, it was with a promotion to major and a chest full of new medals. Derek was a distant memory, a lesson learned about the importance of being with someone who celebrates your strength rather than resents it. Years later, when people ask me about my wedding day, I tell them it was the best day of my life. Not because I got married, I didn't, but because I learned exactly who I was and who stood with me when it mattered. I learned that my uniform wasn't a costume or a fantasy. It was my truth, my identity, and my honor. And I learned that the right people will see that truth and salute it, literally and figuratively, without asking you to be anything other than exactly who you are. I'm Major America Rodriguez now, still serving, still leading, still wearing my uniform with the pride my parents instilled in me and the honor my soldiers reaffirmed in a church in Georgetown, Texas. And every single day, I'm grateful I chose duty over a man who would have asked me to be less than I am. Because in the end, the only person who needed to accept me in that uniform was me. Everyone else was just along for the ride.